Hi, this is Rabbi Tzvi Mandel. It's a Monday night, Parshas B'Shalach. This week, Wednesday night and Thursday will be the 15th of Shvat, a beautiful holiday that's mentioned in Shulchan Aruch, and many people eat from the fruits of Israel, and people eat from esrog, and the Rebbetzin made special esrog drink that she ferments for 3 months. And we used to have great Tu B'Shvat parties in Kahal B'nai Yisrael, Congregation Kahal B'nai Yisrael, community of Jewish friends. But, there's time for everything. And Mitzvah Hashem, one day we'll get back to it. So, Thursday is Tu B'Shvat. And from Thursday, months later, is Purim. And the halacha is that we start studying the laws of Purim, or any holiday 30 days before. So, tonight what we'll do is, first we'll give over a beautiful story from Rabbi David Zlatapala. The Heilige is Zlatapala Rebbe's Chassidishe L'Kay Salamim. And then we will continue with the laws of tzitzis, so that we could soon finish them, but meanwhile we'll start at least the Megilah with some of its commentaries. And the story with Rabbi David Zlatapala. Rabbi David Zlatapala was very, very great. He was one of the children of the Chenabla. Chenabla Maggid's Chassidishe L'Kay Salamim. And he had a chassid that was called to join the Russian army. And unlike the typical chassid, this guy was a little bit hasty, too hasty. And he right away ran and got his stuff together and signed in by the government, and they took him into the army, and he realized, wait a minute, I didn't even ask the Rebbe about this. How could I do such a thing? And so one day he was able to escape a little bit and go to the Rebbe, and he tells the Rebbe, I'm so sorry, I didn't even realize. Somehow it slipped my mind, and here I am in the army, and the Rebbe says, don't worry. You will have to stay there for 2 more months. At the end of 2 months, the exact day that 2 months will end, you will be freed on the condition that all the time that you're in the army, you shall keep the Torah and halachas in the Shulchan Aruch and Chassidishe just like in your own home. Don't even digress from it for a second, in any way, for any reason. And of course, he was very happy to hear, as we learned in Chumash, that when one has to go through Galus, through exile, and one knows when he's going to be out of there, then it's not even considered an exile, because he always knows that there's hope and there's a future, and he knows when it's going to be. The test of our exile and all the exiles in Galus and are when we don't know, and we have to just use not just, but we have to use our emunah and betachin that Hashem's going to take us out of this place. Right? Every day, a Jew believes that today I'll be leaving the Galus. That's how Rav Feinstein translates the words Achakla b'chol yom sheyavai. B'chol yom me'en vadai. I'm almost sure that today, this is it. That's how Yidden lived for the last thousands of years. So he was happy to be in the army, and he listened to what his Rebbe said, and every halacha and every mitzvah, and he made sure to daven and learn and everything. And one day, he's in the middle of davening mincha, middle of davening the afternoon service, and all of a sudden this great officer comes, like one of the highest officers in the Russian army, and as soon as he came, all the soldiers have to line up in a certain way, and he's in the middle of Shemona Esrei, doesn't step out of Shemona Esrei and praise the Shemona Esrei like he always does every day, every word, with kavanah, with simcha, as if he's standing in front of Hashem. And this guy is looking at all the other soldiers and looking at him, And of course the soldiers, are smirking and laughing, and it would take nothing for a Russian officer to make this guy a head shorter. But he was just standing in dismay. He couldn't believe this. Finally, the guy finishes Shemona Esrei, and the officer walks up to him and he says, "Sir, do you know who I am?" He says, "Yes, I know." He said, "What were you doing?" He says, "I was praying to my God as I do every day." "And what were you praying to him about?" "I was praying that our country should win the war and we should always be on top, and there shouldn't be any spilling of any blood of any of our people. And that's what I always pray for. I'm very loyal to the government. And it took me quite some time to speak out these things to the true God, the creator of the world." And the officer was really, really beside himself. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes even evil people, when they hear the truth, and it's, who knows who this officer was, he himself might have been a Jew, but whatever it was, hearing it from a true soul, from a true heart, the guy says, "I am allowing you to go out today out of the army. Is there anyone else in this army that's like you that I can also free because I respect you?" And he looked around and he says, "Yes, that fellow there. It was a Chernobyl Enikel, also a Chassidishe young man," and he let them both go out free. What a story, right? So we shall go back to our Hilchos first. And we were holding in the laws of tzitzis in Kitzer, I believe the last chapter, 9. Okay, we'll go to the 9th chapter, paragraph 'm not sure if we're holding over here, but I think we've covered almost everything. And most of the halachas that are day to day, that are common, I think we did cover. So let's go to paragraph 14. That way, perhaps between tonight and maybe one other night, we can finish this and we'll go straight to the laws of Purim then. 14, chapter 9, paragraph 14. The strings of the tzitzis must be made of entwined threads. In other words, each string must be made of a single strand that is doubled and twisted to make a single string. If any string unraveled from its twisted state, then the halacha considers any unraveled portion as if it had been severed and is no longer part of the string. This halacha applies to a thread that was doubled and twisted only once. And therefore, when the twisted part unravels, is single ply. In our tzitzis, it is common for the string to consist of threads that were twisted 4 or 8 times. Therefore, even if one of the strings unraveled into 2, it would not be considered as cut off, since each of those strings themselves are made of twisted threads. Mishnah Berurah 11:17. We're up to paragraph 15. This paragraph teaches an application of the word tasa v'lo mina asli. We spoke about this before in paragraph 6, as it applies to a talis garment that was split into 2. Tasa v'lo mina asli means that the mitzvah of tefillin and many other mitzvahs must be made by the person. It can't be made automatically. Let's say if you have a garment that just by ripping it apart, all of a sudden comes into a kosher pair of tzitzis. That is not kosher because it says, Tasa, you shall make it, v'lo mina asi. It shouldn't be made by itself. It shouldn't be made automatically. Okay, so these halachas that we're going to learn right now in paragraph 15, chapter 9, address this what could be a problem or how to avoid it. Okay. A talus that had tzitzis tassels already affixed to it, and it was divided into two pieces, as is commonly done with many of our talus garments, which are made of two attached pieces of cloth, and occasionally they are taken apart to clean or to fix the talus, and then, after it is fixed or cleaned, the pieces are reconnected by sewing. The halacha in such cases is as follows. Since usually each part is large enough to wrap oneself in, and as such is still obligated in tzitzis, therefore it is sufficient if one removes two tzitzis tassels from whichever part that he wishes to, and after the talus is put back together, he should retie the tzitzis tassels that were removed. Since both parts of the garment remained garments that were obligated in tzitzis, there is no need to remove all of the tzitzis tassels before reconnecting the two pieces. However, both tzitzis tassels must be removed from at least one of the parts of the talus, because to simply reconnect two pieces, each one with two tzitzis tassels, would violate the precept of tasa v'lo. You should make it and not use that which is already made, which we spoke about. To remedy this, the two tzitzis of one of the pieces must be removed. That's why we do this, and tie them back on after the talus has been reconnected. In this way, we say that the part upon which the tzitzis remained was the main part of the talus, and the other part is in addition to that talus. This avoids the problem of using that which is already made. Shabura 15:9. Mishnah Berurah 15:9 disputes this and writes that although it is ideal to remove the talus on one side, as above, it is not strictly necessary, since, according to most authorities, this case is not a problem of using that which is already made, and therefore you don't have to do that according to the Mishnah Berurah. So this is a stringency of the Kitzer Shulchan Aruch, but the Mishnah Berurah itself, but the Mishnah Berurah argues and says this is not a chiyuv. One doesn't have to do that. It's just a stringency. If one wants to do that, it's fine. However, if each part of the talus, after the talus was divided, does not have by itself enough material with which to wrap oneself in, one must remove all of the tzitzis strings. Because when the pieces were separated, each side became exempt from the obligation to affix tzitzis to it, due to its small size. Now, after the two parts were joined together again, and the garment again became large enough to require tzitzis, if the original tzitzis tassels would have been left on, since the tzitzis were already affixed to it when it became a garment that is obligated in tzitzis, it is invalid, due to the precept of you shall make it and not use that which is already made, like we just said before. So that's why it has to be done that way. If in the case where the two sides were separated, one of the sides has enough material with which to wrap, and one side no longer has enough material with which to wrap, one should remove the tzitzis tassels from the part that does not have enough material with which to wrap. For if the tzitzis were not removed from that side when it is rejoined to the other side, and becomes obligated once again in the midst of tzitzis, the already existing tzitzis will be invalid due to this same rule. Okay. We'll stop here. Meanwhile, that was, what was that again? That was 15. Paragraph 15. We'll see who else speaks about this. First, we'll see what the Rav says about it. 15. 9:15. Chapter 9. Paragraph 15. Seems the Rav agrees with the Mishnah Berurah that one does not have to take these tzitzis off and put them back on. Yeah. Let's just see if Rabbi Braun in his Sha'arim Mitzvayim Ba'alacha, which is an unbelievable, genius compilation of Tshuvas Svarim and other Piskei Halacha. Does he add anything over here? So there's an interesting halacha that he quotes from the Pri Megadim in Mishbetz Zav, Simin Yud Ches of Katan Aleph. So the Pri Megadim says as follows: if someone puts on tzitzis by night on a piece of cloth that's going to be worn as tzitzis, he puts on the strings. Is that a right? Or does it have to be made only during the daytime when there's actually a mitzvah from the Torah to wear tzitzis? So the Pri Megadim says an interesting leniency that it's okay to do that, and he says l'chatchila, really at first choice one should not do that, but if he did it, it's okay. And the B'Zhana Rav, the Tshuvas HaMasham in Siman Yud Ches, and the Tshuvas Lev Chaim in the third volume, Siman Chavtes, both hold that even l'chatchila, it's definitely allowed to be done without any question, without any hesitation. And there's something even more interesting over here. The Pri Megadim says, well, he thinks about it, he goes back and forth. If someone puts on tzitzis on Shabbos by accident, are they kosher tzitzis? So he says, yes, they are kosher tzitzis. Because though we have a rule, kol milsa de amar achman loisav the yavid le'mahani, everything that the Torah says one should not do, if he did do it, like in this case, and it was an accident, you can't blame. There's nothing, he didn't do anything wrong. It was an accident. So usually we say yavid le'mahani. It doesn't help. It just would be a non-kosher pair of tzitzis. However, there's a rule that when the prohibition is only because the day prohibits it, but the action itself is not a prohibited action. He's not eating pig, or he's not doing something he's not supposed to. The day, which is Shabbos, is what the sin is. So in such a case, we say that it's okay. Very interesting. Chiddush. Shaycha b'Shabbos. Brings a proof from someone who shechts an animal on Shabbos, who does kosher slaughtering on Shabbos. Story is that's kosher. If it was done by accident. Sman, kosher, mishbid, reish zayin, reish ches. Now, okay, other achronim, other great paiskim, halachic deciders over the generations hold that it's not good, that the tzitzis is not a good beer. Tzitzis, and there's a lot about this. The Pnei Maven, Shuvas Pnei Maven, Simni Adal holds it is kosher. Okay, interesting stuff. We will now go to the beginning of the most joyous holiday we have all year round, the holiday of Purim, and we'll start with the Megillah. And I will read the English translation from the ArtScroll Children's Megillah, which I think is just great. And then we'll go over the commentaries. So we'll read a number of verses, and then we'll go to Rashi, and we'll go to other commentaries. And it happened during the days of Achashverosh, who ruled over 127 countries from Hodu to Kush. Some translate the countries as India and Ethiopia. King Achashverosh sat on his royal throne in Shulchan, the capital. In the 3rd year of his rule, the king made a party for all his officers and servants, the army of Persia and Media. All of the noblemen and all the officers of the countries were there. For 180 days, the king showed off his treasures and the greatness of his kingdom. When the party was over, the king made another special party just for the people in Shushan, big and small. The second party lasted for 7 days, and it took place in the garden of the king's palace. There were drapes of fine white cotton with blue wool, held in place with fine linen and purple wool, on silver rods and marble columns. There were gold and silver couches, and the floor was made of colorful precious stone. Verse 7, the drinks were served in golden cups. No 2 cups were the same. There was a great amount of wine, an amount that only a king could provide. The drinks were served, this is 8, verse 8. First chapter, verse 8. The drinks were served with the following rule: no one is forced to drink. This was done so that each person at the party would be free to do whatever he wanted. Here's some interesting points. After the 6-month party was over, everyone in Shushan, including the Jews, were invited to a special 7-day celebration. Achashverosh and Haman planned this second party in order to make the Jews sin. They hoped that the Jews would eat the non-kosher food, violate the Shabbos, and do bad things. This would make Hashem angry at the Jewish people, and then Haman and Achashverosh would be able to kill out all the Jews. Hashem became angry at the Jewish people for enjoying this 7-day feast. Their leader Mordechai had told them not to go, but they didn't listen to him. Hashem also became angry at Achashverosh for using the holy vessels of the Beis Hamikdash, of the temple, as, I should read over here, these little lines are pretty good. Whenever the Bible starts with the word Vahi Bimei, and it was in the days, and it happened during these days, as it does here, is telling us that something bad is going to happen. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylonia, destroyed the first temple, the first Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim. He exiled the Jews to Babylonia. 51 years later, the armies of Persia and Media conquered the Babylonians. Shushan was the capital city of the Persian Empire, and that is where Achashverosh was king. The display at this party showed off all the king's wealth. The party lasted for 6 whole months. Each month had a different theme, meant to show how rich and powerful Achashverosh was. Wow. All the gold and the silver that Nebuchadnezzar stole from our temple, our Beis Hamikdash, was shown off at the party. So that's what he means over here when he says that he used the holy vessels of the temple, and that angered our Father who loves us so much. Verse 9, chapter 1, verse 9. The king orders his wise men to bring Queen Vashti to him. Okay. Queen Vashti made a separate party for the women in King Achashverosh's palace. On the seventh day, the last day of the party, the king was a little drunk. He spoke to his 7 main servants, Mehuman, Bizisa, Charvoina, Bigsa, Va'avagsa, Zesa, V'charkas. The king told them to bring Queen Vashti wearing her royal crown so the nations and the officers can see how beautiful she is. Now, Vashti was the daughter of Babylonian king Belshazzar and the great-granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar, who had destroyed the temple of Beis Hamikdash and exiled the Jews from Eretz Yisrael. Vashti was from a family of kings. The women's party would bring her honor. The 7th day that we're referring to here was Shabbos. Okay. Now, the queen refuses, right? Verse 12, chapter 1, verse 12. But Queen Vashti refuses to listen to the command the king sent with his servants. The king becomes furious, and he's burning with anger. Then the king spoke to the wise men. He discussed things with those who knew the laws and rules. 14. The wise men who are close to the king were Karshana, Sheser, Admasa, Sarshish, Meres, Marsana, Memuchan. These were the 7 officers who were always allowed to see the king. They were the most important people in the land. Now, a closer look. Vashti did not want to go to the king because her father was a king. She thought she was much greater than Achashverosh. Hashem made her grow a tail, and her body became full of sores. I cannot let anyone see me like this, she thought. She did not go to the king. Vashti was evil. Hashem punished her because she forced Jewish girls to work for her on Shabbos. Also, she helped convince the king not to let the Jews rebuild the Beis Hamikdash, the temple, and she used its holy vessels also at her party. Now, Memuchan, one of the advisors, advised the king to have Vashti killed. Let's see this. Verse 15. We're still in chapter 1. The king wanted his advisors to tell him how to punish Queen Vashti for not listening to the command the king sent with his servants. 16, verse 16. Memuchan spoke up first to the king and to his officers. Queen Vashti has done something wrong, not just to the king, but to all his officers and to all the people in every nation that Achashverosh rules. Verse 17. All the women will find out what the queen did, and they will not respect or listen to their husbands. They will say, King Achashverosh ordered Queen Vashti to come, and she did not listen. Verse 18. When the princesses of Persia and Media will hear about the queen, they will do the same thing to the king's officers, and it will cause much embarrassment and anger. Let's see. Our sages teach that Memuchan was Haman. He told Achashverosh, the people make fun of a king who cannot control his own wife. Also, other women will stop respecting and listening to their husbands. So the king said Vashti should be killed. Once Achashverosh was no longer drunk, he did not want Vashti to be killed. But it was too late, because he had already said that she must be killed. Now, Vashti was the last royal descendant of Nebuchadnezzar, as we said before. She was a descendant of Nebuchadnezzar, who was a very ugly person who destroyed the first Beis Hamikdash, first temple. Her death was Nebuchadnezzar's final punishment. Vashti was executed on Shabbos because she forced Jewish girls to work on Shabbos. Verse 19, the king sent letters to all his subjects, making the husband the ruler of each house. 19, if the king thinks this is a good idea, he should issue a royal law that will be written forever in the law books of Persia and Media. Let Vashti never be allowed to come to King Achashverosh, and let the king make a new king, someone who is better than Vashti. 20. The ruling of what the king will do will be heard throughout the entire great kingdom. Then every wife in the land will honor her husband. Verse 21. The king and his officers liked this idea, and the king did just as Memucan suggested. Letters were sent, verse 22. Letters were sent out to every country that the king ruled. Each country received the letter in its own language. It said that each man will be the ruler of his own house, and the family should speak his language, the husband's language, in other words. Put this aside. Now we will go through some of the commentaries, and we will start with Rashi. Back to the beginning. Now the first Rashi's stress some of the points that we already spoke out. Achashverosh was the king of Persia, and he took over after Koresh. Koresh was the king at the end of the 70 years of the exile of Babylonia. The verse says, he was Achashverosh, who Achashverosh? He was evil from beginning to the end. He became a king on his own. He was not a descendant of kings like Vashti. Now it says he ruled over from Haida to Kush, which is the 127 countries. So Rashi says that he was, just like he reigned over the 127 from Haida to Kush, which are right next to each other. The sages say just like he reigned on Haida, Kush, he was a strong leader. These two places are right next to each other, right next to him. So too he reigned with a strong hand on the whole 127 countries. I'd like to bring out a point here that the Heilig Chassam Sofer says. The Holy Chassam Sofer says as follows. Now, Chassam Sofer says a very original, interesting point. We know that throughout the Megillah, Hashem's name is not mentioned. We also know that one can, God forbid, make the mistake that the whole miracle in the Megillah is a natural thing, or was a political change in the government, because one of the biggest points of Purim and of Megilas Esther is that it's hidden, the hiddenness of Hashem. Says the Heilig Chassam Sofer a beautiful thing. He says the main miracle happened from the beginning of the Megillah. Because the fact that the Jews shouted out to Hashem and did tshuva, that itself is not a miracle. Why shouldn't Hashem receive our crying and our screaming and our tshuva that we did? That's not an unnatural thing. That's not a miracle. So he says the main miracle begins where the king kills his own wife, which is a very unnatural thing. 186 days, 180 days plus the 6 of the 7 days. And then the 7th, which is the 187th day, he sends a messenger to Vashti. After so many days, he had control of himself and he wasn't so drunk. And the last day, the 187th day, he got nuts. Nishtaga b'shigon, he became a sugar. And also the queen became crazy, that she didn't listen to what he has to say. And she knew good and well that in his angry moods he could kill her. So all this is unnatural. The fact alone also that he listened to this advisor of his to kill his wife is also a very unnatural thing. So all these things, says the Chassam Sofer, were the preparation for the last miracle that the Jews should be saved. He also brings down a very beautiful point, that really Jews weren't so good then because they had pleasure from the party. That's the real truth, as the Talmud teaches us in Megilas 12. And they really were not fit for a miracle to happen to them. However, this is something very beautiful. Hashem loves us so much that even where we rebel against Hashem, and even where we do the wrong thing, Hashem is already preparing the great miracle to save the Jewish people. Because like the Talmud says in Kedushin 30, even at the time that we're rebelling, we're still Hashem's only children, and Hashem loves us. Very beautiful. Okay. So there's another Chassam Sofer that says as follows. Chazal say, the sages teach us that Achashverosh, Achav Shel Rosh. One can split the word Achashverosh to mean the brother of the head. Who's the head? The head is Nebuchadnezzar, the ugly Nebuchadnezzar, right? Vashti's great-grandfather, right? Nebuchadnezzar killed the Jewish people, and Achashverosh wanted to kill the Jewish people. What does this mean? So he says something very beautiful over here. He says, on his commentary in the Haggadah, which I hope we'll be learning before Pesach, after Purim, it says as follows: Seilmad, go out and learn through the Torah. Ma bikish love and arami lasas. What did love and the ugly love and want to do? Paroi wanted to kill out all the male babies, as we have in these week's Parsha in Shemais. We know that. Lavash wanted to uproot the whole Jewish people, as we know. He wanted to destroy Yaakov, and there should never even be a Jewish nation. So he says as follows: Achashverosh and Nebuchadnezzar. Achashverosh wanted not to kill out the Jewish people, but to manipulate the Jewish people, to always be the boss over them, to tell them what to do, what mitzvahs to do, what mitzvahs not to do, how to do their mitzvahs, how to run their lives. He wanted to own them. And that's a lot uglier than Nebuchadnezzar, who wanted to kill them all out. First of all, to kill them all out, we know that Chazal teaches us that there will never be any leader or anyone that will be able to kill out the Jewish people altogether. We have that promise from Hashem. So it's worse, the ugly anti-Semite that wants to run our lives for us and tell us what to do and what not to do, and throw us in jail and kill us and murder and make life miserable for people, than the one that wants to kill us out altogether. And he says that's the difference between love and power as well. To want to always have the Jews dead, but keeping them around for his pleasure is on a certain level worse than the murderer that kills us out. He brings down another chazal. The sages say that Kum Aleinu Adam, a person stood against us, a king, a person who's not a king, because, as we said, Achashverosh was a king, but he did not come from a dynasty. He wasn't a descendant of kings. So he says, what's the difference if it's a king or not a king? So he says something interesting. He says, because Adam, plain person has an idea in his mind. He has, like they say in Yiddish, a juk in the cup, right? He wants to get rid of the people, and he'll do it and he'll carry it out because that's his mishigas, that's what keeps him alive, and he'll do it. A king, ironically, cannot always do everything he wants because there's laws and there's people under him and there's a constitution, supposedly, that they listen to, and therefore it's a lot easier for a single person who's crazy enough to hurt us than a king. He also says another thing over here, that why does the Megillah have to go to say that it was 127 countries that he reigned over? So he says because he took over all the 127 countries gradually. First he was the king over 7, and he was so mean to the people, to all the people, that they ran away to some of the other 120. Then he became king over 20 more, so it was 27. And then the whole 127, they had nowhere to run to from this ugly Achashverosh. Here he says something very interesting. The Talmud says in Megillah, page 11a, that 3 people reigned over the whole world with strength. Achav, Nebuchadnezzar, and Achashverosh. So, if he reigned over the whole world, that means he reigned over all the Jews in all the countries as well. Now we know, as we just mentioned, that Hashem swore that he's not going to destroy all the Jewish people. So therefore, this is part of the miracle that he became king over the whole world. So he was the king over all the Jewish people, and therefore his horrible advice or his idea of killing all the Jewish people were not going to happen because Hashem swore he's not going to allow anyone to kill us completely. Kill us out completely. There's so much, but I think we'll stop at least with some Sefer. Let's go through some more of the Rashis and maybe we'll continue next time. Some Sefer and other commentaries. There's so much on the Megillah, it's endless. Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem. Go through some more of the important Rashis. I mean, everything's important. In verse 5, the Ginas goes on the place where vegetables grow, the garden where they grow, and the Bisan is where the trees are. In verse 7, where it speaks about the drinks, so each drink was different than the other, as we said. And Chazal teach us, the sages teach us, that each person was given to drink a wine that was older than him. That's a sort of like a very fancy and respectable way, that you get the wine that you want, and wine, the older that it is, the better it is. So, yeah. Now, in verse 8, it says that no one was forced with the drinking business. So Rashi explains that the way it was those days, that there were parties that people would come to, that they were forced actually to drink and to take part. I guess that was part of how those societies worked. seventh day was Shabbos, as we mentioned before, when this thing began, and she was killed on Shabbos. Now, Vashti in verse 12, it says like this: the sages say that since she grew a tail and she got leprosy all over, so she didn't want to come. And the reason for this punishment was because she would actually make Jewish girls come and work in the kitchen on Shabbos without clothes. So therefore this decree came against her to come to the king without clothes. And as it says, with the crown, meaning only the crown on her. It was the only article of clothes that she was allowed to wear, so to say. She got angry because it was a horrible thing that he sent her to do such a thing. Okay, I think we'll stop here meanwhile. And in verse 22, Rashi says that a woman was forced to study and learn the language of her husband as a result of this. That was the decree. We'll stop here meanwhile. Have a great night.